In today's episode of the Having It All podcast, I'm talking about agreement and understanding. They are not the same thing, people. Welcome to the Having It All podcast, the show about what it takes to live an abundant, loving life. My name is Matthew Bivens, and each week I'm helping you get out of your head so that you can truly have it all. Let's do it. Nod your head if you have been in this type of situation before. So imagine you're sitting across from somebody who holds a completely different viewpoint or opinion than yourself. They believe that XYZ is correct and is true, while you believe that 1, 2, 3 is the reality. You go back and forth saying why you're right while they're wrong and trying to do your damn best to get them to understand you because you feel that once they understand you, you are convinced that they will agree with you. This is the type of situation that we're talking about today, and when we're getting into the topic of the difference between agreement versus understanding. It might sound like a simple topic. What I'm talking about today might sound almost trivial. However, when you get this stuff wrong, when you misuse agreement, when you get this stuff wrong, when you confuse agreement and understanding, the implications are huge. Confusing the two can lead to serious breakdowns in relationships, and it's often the breaking point in conversations and communication. So it's absolutely worth exploring. Now, I've talked extensively on this podcast about a family situation that I'm experiencing right now, something that myself, my sisters, and my father are going through right now, and I'm going to do it again. I'm going to go back into this situation and talk about it with you all because it is so ripe with just amazing examples of alignments and misalignments that I'm learning from. I'm learning from them every single day, and that I know that you all can learn from. And just from the emails I've received from listeners, I know that people are getting a lot by me being transparent and by me opening up and sharing what's going on. So the scenario that I explained at the top of the episode is exactly what happened with my sister. I don't really want to go into all the back details of the situation, but basically there was a fight between my dad and my sister, a physical fight. And since then, that was 6 months ago, and since then we've been honestly trying for so long, for so many of those 6 months. I'd say 5 of those 6 months were conversations where we were going back and forth on things that we disagreed on. There was a breakdown in the communication and a breakdown in us moving forward in this situation because we were seeking agreement as opposed to understanding. So in this situation, my sister wanted to do one thing with the situation. I wanted to do something else. And we would just go back and forth and really built up a whole lot of frustration and ill will towards one another because we were not seeking any sort of understanding. All we wanted to happen was for the other person to agree with us. And honestly, for a while, it seemed like hope for a resolution was slipping away. Because each conversation, it felt like we might take one step forward one week and then 10 steps backwards in the next conversation. And that was sort of the pattern. So I've been sharing this with some friends of mine, and I think it was last week, maybe less than 2 weeks ago, I shared it with one great friend, and we were actually in the middle of a workout, and so we're just sort of sitting there hanging onto the equipment, talking and not working out, and she's giving me some amazing advice and amazing perspective on this whole family situation. And the one piece of advice that really stuck with me is when she told me to just shut the hell up and listen. She told me to not defend my stance, not try to get her to agree with me, not try to get her to understand me. Screw the agreement part, even trying to get her to understand where I was coming from. Don't even do that. Just shut the hell up and listen. And so I took that feedback and I had a phone call scheduled for later in that day, and I got on that call and I just shut my mouth and I took my blows. They were coming at me fast and furious, and all sorts of things where my sister was saying, well, you've done this and you've done that. And, I didn't agree with what she was saying. I didn't agree with it. But in that conversation, my goal wasn't to create or get to a point of agreement with her. It was simply to understand where she was coming from. So I worked on understanding where she was coming from. I would say something like, okay, so what I'm hearing is that you were feeling like I was punishing you by not intentionally making you a part of my daughter's life, that I was withholding her from you, that, I didn't introduce her to you over the holidays when you had the first chance to meet her, and that you felt like I was doing that to punish you, whether it was consciously or subconsciously. That's what I'm hearing you say. And my sister said, yeah, that's what I'm saying. And that was it. That was it. I mean, I literally only tried to understand where she was coming from. I dropped any sort of attachment to us agreeing on core things because I didn't agree with the facts she was presenting. And that was a big thing for me. And a huge point of realization was that feelings are not facts, right? Like, she was feeling something. The facts were slightly different. I didn't agree with the facts, but my goal wasn't agreement. It was understanding. And I wasn't confusing agreement in that situation with understanding. And neither was she, because once she felt understood, we could move forward. She didn't need me to agree with her. I could say, I see where you're coming from, and I said, I own what I did. I own how I showed up. I own how I treated you. The underlying reasons I don't agree with. I don't think that that's where my motivations were, but that is how I treated you. So, okay, I own it. I didn't have to agree with her to understand her. That's the big point. And so once we were able to get to that point of understanding, once she felt understood, we could actually move forward. We could actually move forward in the conversation. And literally what happened in this conversation was that all of the tension in the room, all of the anxiety that, I was feeling and she potentially was feeling, all of that was just dissolved when she felt understood. There was nothing more for us to argue on, and we can move forward into the next point. And this was so huge for us, and the reason why I'm sharing it with you is because so often the goal of a conversation is agreement, especially when it's emotional, especially when you're sitting on opposite ends of a topic, when you have differing opinions. The goal tends to be, I need you to agree with me. I want you to agree with me. You have to agree with me, otherwise we can't move forward. But the kicker is that you can understand where someone is coming from without agreeing with their position. Like, you have the ability to move forward and carry on with your conversation, carry on with your relationship, and still not agree with that person. So it's so important to understand the difference between agreement and understanding, because if you don't, and if you constantly are seeking agreement in your relationships, in your conversations, where understanding is truly what you're after, you will get stuck. The conversation will get stuck. Your progress will get stuck. The relationship could get stuck. And this type of thing is applicable for family relationships, romantic relationships, friendships, and even parenting. Everything is, you can use this lesson and understand, distinguish the differences between agreement and understanding. It's applicable to all those things. And this even came up with my wife and I, Sarah. Sarah and I had, over the holiday, it's January, it's middle of January right now. And so back on Christmas, we realized that we did not agree on a parenting style. We disagreed, and we were on very different, not very different, but we were on differing ends of how to proceed with baby Maya's sleep and her sleep patterns. So Sarah wanted a strict sleep schedule. She wanted Maya to go down for a nap at this point, this time in the morning, and then go down for another nap in the early afternoon, and then be in bed for her final day sleep and at like 6 or 7 p.m., whatever it was. And that's what she wanted to do. She wanted to have that strict schedule. And me, I was a bit more lenient. I was like, well, the kid will sleep when she wants to sleep. And if we miss a nap here or there, it's okay. And if she doesn't get to bed by 6:30 and ends up going to bed by 8:30, like, it's not going to kill her. And this sort of disagreement actually kind of came to a head in the holidays when she felt I wasn't really respecting her desire to keep this consistent schedule, especially on Christmas when we were at my mom's house and all this commotion was going on. And I was like, oh, Maya's fine. And Sarah's saying, no, I want her to have this consistent sleep. And so we were just disagreeing on this fundamental point. And we ended up taking a step back and trying to figure out, like, okay, well, why do we disagree? Like, why do you want her to sleep this way? And where is this coming from? And what I came to understand was that Sarah grew up in a different type of environment than I did. She was raised with having a little bit more structure around things like that, and where you do schedule things like naps, and you make sure that, hey, listen, if we're going to go out to lunch, let's make sure that we're home by this point by 1 p.m. so the baby can go down for her nap. And if we're planning to do an evening date, let's make sure that we either wrap it up before 6 or we start it after 6 so that the baby can go down. Like, that's the type of environment that Sarah grew up in. I grew up in a very different environment. So, overall, Sarah was a little bit more strict and scheduled, and she wanted to keep to those things, and I wasn't. But once we were able to get to that point of understanding, and I understood where she was coming from, she understood where I was coming from, it was like, oh, okay. We don't have to agree. We don't have to agree on what we want to do with Maya in terms of sleep, but simply understanding one another, what it actually led to is that Sarah now is a little bit less strict, and I'm a little bit more scheduled. So it's like we naturally came to a position of compromise around this. So the big takeaway from all of this, from this whole episode, is that I want you to be mindful of when you are seeking understanding, but you're confusing it with agreement. When you truly want to be understood, you want to know that the person sitting across from you gets where you're coming from, understands and respects your point of view and your opinion, yet what you are saying is, I want you to agree with me. Those are so very different things. And once you become aware of that in yourself, then you can identify that when it's happening in another person, the person you're sitting across from. And becoming more aware of the difference between agreement and understanding just helps you to avoid breakdowns. Helps you to avoid those breakdowns when you are so firm in having an agreement, when really understanding is what can move things forward. Don't want you to get caught up in that. I want you to be able to have these conversations, have these relationships, understand one another, potentially disagree, but continue to move forward with love. Because that's what all this is about, right? Abundant, loving life. That's what having it all is about. And so if you're sitting there holding on to your stance, holding on firm in your position, and you are afraid to move out of whatever it is, maybe it's you don't understand, there's judgment going on, there's fear, what I want you to be able to do is surrender. Surrender it. Adopt another person's perspective. Really look at, well, what's the whole point of this conversation? And, what's the bigger thing we're playing for in our relationship? Is it worth what we're stuck on right now? Seek love, people. It's that simple. For today's move, I want you to practice seeking to understand someone and really release that need for agreement. So the easiest way to do this is to think right now about any sort of conflict that you've got going on in your life. Conflict with another person, something where you two are stuck on opposite sides of a topic, of differing opinions, whatever it is. That's what I want you to think about and envision that person, and then go make it happen. Go and try to seek to understand that person and release that need for agreement. Most of the time, you don't need to agree to move forward. Yes, I'm sure there are circumstances where agreement has to happen if If you're getting work done on your house, right, you want to agree with your contractor before moving forward. So I'm not talking about that sort of thing, right? I'm talking about some of those things where we get caught up in the emotion. And the agreement piece is really your ego saying, I want to be right. That's what I'm talking about. So identify those situations, those scenarios in your life. I imagine that there's at least one of them happening right now with all the different relationships you have going on. And for you, really, your action, because this podcast is all about action, and that's why this section is called Move. This segment is called Move, and in this segment, it's about giving you something to put what we talked about at the top of the episode into practice. It's that action that's going to get you from one place to another. So go and act. Identify that person. You know what the conflict is. You know what the topic is that you guys are just stuck on. And approach them with an air of humility and simply seeking to understand where they're coming from. I talked about this type of thing in a previous episode called How to Help Your Loved Ones Feel More Understood. And in it, I actually broke down like specifically the process for helping somebody feel understood. So go check that out. It's in the Move section of that episode, and I'll give a really brief breakdown right now, but a more thorough breakdown is in that episode. Again, the episode is How to Help Your Loved Ones Feel Understood. I'll put a link to it in the show notes for this one, so you can just go to the show notes over at firesidenetwork.com for this episode on agreement versus understanding, and then you can click over to the other episode. You can also find it on iTunes and Stitcher and all the other podcast spots. So here's real quick rundown of what you do. It's very simple, and again, it's going to require some humility. So you're going to get to practice something that might be challenging for you. And if it is challenging for you to be humble and to, shut your mouth and just listen, then that's great, because it means that when you do it, because I know you will, because this, in this show, you all are about movement and growth and healing. So I know that you're going to do it. And when you do, you're going to grow. You're going to grow because you're going to be doing something that is going to challenge a limiting belief that you have, challenge a way of thinking or viewing people that is no longer serving you, and you're going to rewrite it with something more powerful. So simply what you do is you address that person and you say, hey, listen, I really want to understand where you're coming from. I want to understand why you are, adamant on X, Y, or Z. And so please share. And then you just listen and you let them share for as long as it takes, as long as they want to. Let them spill out everything that they have to say. When they seem to be complete, you say, hey, are you complete? And if they are, they'll say yes. If they're not, then they'll continue. Once they are complete, you say, okay, so what I understand and what I'm hearing is blank. And in that blank, you summarize what they said as succinctly and as accurately as possible. And, try to demonstrate that you really heard them. You really heard them. If they say something like, yeah, I was a little frustrated when you said this, this, and this. Put yourself in their shoes, and the way that you summarize it back to them might be, you were pretty pissed that I said this, this, and this, right? Like, really try to put yourself in that person's shoes and repeat what they said. And when you're complete, you ask them, do you feel understood? Did I get that correct? Am I hearing you correctly? And they might say, yeah, you are. That is how I feel. Or they might say, no, actually, you said this, but what I really meant was this, this, this. And you just go back and forth. It's that back and forth until you get to the point where they say, yeah, I feel like you're hearing me. I feel understood. And of course, this type of thing, it's going to happen in your style, and the person is going to respond in their style. So it may not be as clean and as, cut and dry as, do you feel understood? Yes, I feel perfectly understood. Like, it may not happen like that, right? Because these things are probably emotional. But the whole point, put yourself in their shoes. Put yourself in their shoes. Drop the ego. Drop your need to be correct. And simply just hear the person. Connect with the emotion of what they're saying. hear them, and be like, okay, this is what I heard you say. There does not have to be agreement in order for conversations and relationships to move forward, to flourish, to thrive, to deepen. Understanding, so many times, understanding is what the person is seeking. When a person feels understood, they feel loved. I mean, that might be one of the key ways in which, your partner or your friend or whoever you're talking to feels loved. So that is your movement for today. Today's gratitude goes to DJ Quads and Maxwell for the music that was used in today's episode. If you like the tracks and you want to check them out, then hop over to firesidenetwork.com and click on the show notes for this episode, and there will be links to both of these artists' pages in the show notes. Also wanted to send some gratitude to Christy for the review on iTunes and to Valerie for the email. I truly appreciate the love in both forms. I really do. If you want to leave me a review, if you like the show and you want to show me a little love that way, then iTunes is definitely the best place to do that. Just hop over there, search for the Having It All podcast, and let me know what you think. Also, if you want to shoot me an email, if you have questions or comments, or you want me to hold you accountable to something, or you want some feedback from me, I love receiving emails from listeners, and you can email me on my personal email address at mattcbivens@gmail.com. That's mattcbivens@gmail.com. And finally, I'm really grateful to anyone who's listening right now who is checking out this show for the first time. That's a risk. It's a risk to find a new podcast and jump on an episode and listen all the way through. And so I truly hope that you feel that that risk paid off for you. Time is one of those things that we don't get back. And so you spending it with me is truly humbling. So thank you. With that, my name is Matthew Bivens, and here is to you having it all.